Dawn of Redemption. Chapter 4. Torn between two worlds, Michael. This was a choice of two worlds for me. It was the most important decision in my entire life. My advantage was having the power of choice between the two worlds. It would determine so much of which one would be best for my life upon personal basis. I could not help but to be woke that night thinking about my decision to go to the seminar to become a priest or to follow in the footsteps of my father, a man who I saw needed a great deal of improvement and guidance upon morality. I would think of my parents and their lifestyle immensely, honestly, and objectively. I saw of how it corrupted the both of them, and I never wanted to be as they were. I wanted to tell my father that when he asked me of why in the world did I want to become a priest, I would come to realize that their lifestyle and the life that I were to adapt to from their success was nothing to me but a variety of many noises that penetrated my inner peace and took it from me. I saw the way they treated people and how people bowed down to them because of their wealth, and it shamed me. Those who bowed to them in the world of business were no distinction from the house servants who accompanied them in their private home. As a child rose up in wealth, the child does not know the vitality or effects of such a monster and its inward effects upon the mind and heart. I noticed of how even the children of those who were friends of my father would treat me because of the power of his wealth, being inoculated into the minds of the children by their parents. They treated me extra kind and considerate when my nature towards them was to be as generous and open to them as a friend as possible. They did not see me as Michael, they saw me as the son of a rich father. A rich and successful businessman in the world of corruption, so they did not see me, as their parents did not see my father for who he was, despite he himself being a lost soul. I remember one day when I was 11 years old, my father took me with him into one of his factories that produced paper for billboards to deal with a problem that had arose there. After one of the workers was said to be incompetent on one of the machines by the manager, he took me by the hand with him on the floor as if he wanted to show me something. We walked for about 3 minutes to find this man, and when he did, he called the man over to him and told him to go and clean out his locker. The man's name was Mr. Charles Aldrich. I will never forget how this man looked and how he pleaded with my father for the preservation of his job, whose ears were as iron shields, deflecting all reason out, about why it happened and that he needed his job to live and to feed and clothe his family. The tears and terror from this man was staggering, and it stabbed at my emotions. I hated what was happening. And as I was trying to let go my father's hand, pulling because I hated what he was doing, the more that he clinched onto it, forcing me to see and agree with what was being done. Poisoning me. When we left, as we were driving home, he was telling me of how never to tolerate people under any circumstances. He was insinuating for me to be cold and callous. Later that evening, as we were eating dinner, my mother asked my father about his day, and he took no hesitation to mention first of how he fired the man on the printing machine. Out of the entire day with him, his pride and arrogance forced him to mention that first above everything else that transpired that dreadful day, truly showing weakness and pettiness, instead of power. After he told my mother, the response from her was just as cold as what he did. Her response was void as the servant poured her champagne into her tall wineglass. I thought that the so-called better side of my father, my mother, would have the tolerance and the compassion that he did not possess to give him a sense of balance, but she did not. I thought that maybe she would talk my father into giving the man his job back. But she said nothing. In this sense, she also bowed down to him as others did, even though she was his wife. She asked me what I had learned that day with my father in his crusade, as if being present during the unjust termination was a lesson of principle for me. And as my father looked over at me with a smile of confidence and reassurance, I would guess him feeling that what he did had impressed his only son to the degree that he already knew what my answer would be in continuing the traditional immoral madness would be executed through me. I answered my mother with a blunt nothing, in internally negating what was expected of me. Later that same night, as I lie in my bed, I was not able to go to sleep because of what I saw that day. I needed to get up early to go to school, and normally I would be sound asleep. But there was no sound of mine that night to bring in the sleep that was needed. I lay there with my eyes open, staring into the partly cloudy night sky at the half moon with its light shining across the sky, transparent to the stars through my bedroom window. I thought of the man and how he had to go home to his family and tell them that he no longer had a job. I knew that it took a great strength for him to humiliate himself in order to do such a thing, even after his liberty was broken and unjustly taken from him by a lost soul and its impulsiveness. It takes a deep wisdom in order to do that and still cause a sense of hope in the hearts of those who depend upon your strength for themselves to survive. I noticed the hallway light had suddenly come on. I heard a knock at my door. It was my father. He called my name as if to see if I was still awake. I played as if I was asleep, so I did not answer him and kept my back turned with my face towards the window across my room. He entered my room calling my name again, but I still did not answer. He said nothing. He just sat down in a chair that was across my room in front of my little work desk. Somehow he knew that I was not asleep, so he started talking to me about what happened. My father. Michael, I know you can hear me. I know you are not asleep. I still did not give him a response. Michael, I know you did not like what I did today, son, but what I had to do was necessary. Do you understand? I still did not answer. I moved, grabbing the covers of my bed further up around my face as if I was trying to hide, or not hear him. Son, there are just some things in this life that are not easy to explain. I am not sure if I explained them to you at this time, you would understand. I was hearing a man who knew he had no reason to terminate Charles Aldrich from his livelihood. I heard a man not having any logical excuse for what happened and what terror and grief he brought upon that man and his family while his own slept comfortably in a huge home, free of those entities. It was as if he tied his own hands with his sheer thirst for enforcing his authority upon those who need to survive. He felt regarding his mercy for them. If I were not able to sleep that night, I could imagine how it was for that man who had a reason to lose sleep. Do you think I am a bad person? Do you feel I am a bad father? Do you? I decided to answer him. I understood why he came in my room that night. He also must have thought about what happened, just not enough to have a little compassion for that man or his family who depend upon him enough to call him. He was now more concerned of how I saw him as a father and a human being, because he seemed to not be able to see himself in his wrongdoing. He was surely a blind man in that sense of himself. I would come to understand later in my life that if you are not a proper example in your own home, you could never be one outside the home. You can never be an honest, good example, in fact. I answered him with a sense of inner conflict as my mouth was pushed up against my pillow. I responded. No. He asked me to turn around. He got up out of the seat as I was turning around to sit up, resting my back on my bedpost. He sat on my bed facing me, looking me in my eyes. I was looking in and away from his eyes. I was kind of nervous, I guess. Most sons are nervous in the presence of their fathers, as if the slightest word or movement would cause in them to be displeased with us. We seem to never outgrow this. It seems as no matter what we are asked as children or even adults, our desire to please them seems to be an internal forethought despite the implications, whether we agree with them or not. This is due to a fear in which seems to be made a traditional method of communication of the son to the father by the factor of intimidation from the father image being imbued in the son. Most would assert that it is the respect factor. But respect has not the ingredient of fear or intimidation. He looked me in the eyes with an expression that I had never seen before. He looked as if he needed something from me. And then what he asked me explained the look. There is nothing I can do to change what I did, Michael. But still I need to know, do you think what I did was wrong?" I looked at him nervously. He used the word "need" to me. I felt of what would my father need from me? It was simple. I knew what he did was wrong, and I knew that he could fix it in picking up his phone and admitting to that man that he had made a mistake, that he was too impulsive in his actions. Yes, because of his trusted manager not looking properly into what the real problem was. To me, that is incompetence. But as he said, there is nothing he can do. His pride and ego would not allow him to do it. The pride and ego diluted his inner power to execute what was right. Thus he became a prisoner of his own image and reputation through corporate propaganda as a tough and no-nonsense man in the corporate American economy. So there were two people inside of him wrestling, dueling for control of his humanity. One that was created by God, who he could only recognize at times as this for possible redemption, and the other one that was created by man and his traditional vanities from years past, of when Theodore Giordano II saw his parents shot down in the streets of Florence, Italy almost 100 years ago. There was far too much ego within him for the son to rise up upon the one created by God. Because he felt that simply giving a worker back his job would then show impulsive, intellectual incompetence in him regarding an assurance of his sound decisions before properly finding out the facts of a matter. I felt that no matter if I said that I thought he was wrong, it did not too much matter in truth. Because even though he was not at peace with what he did, he was not going to change it to give himself peace. So I answered him, "No, Father, you were not wrong." He looked at me with a slight grin on his face. He could feel that I was sweetly lying to him, instinctively trying to protect the feelings of my father. God forgive me for my deception to my father. For as so many others he knew he could not trust to tell him the truth during critical hours as such this, I too learned by example to bow down to him. But, with me, he seemed to have needed honesty. He sighed and then reached up and rubbed the back of my head with his fingers, stroking my hair. He stopped and then looked at me with a humble stare. He then said something that stayed with me for the rest of my life. He said to me, "I want you to be a successful man in this life as I am. I just hope, dear Michael, that you are a better human being than I have been made to become." He leaned forward and kissed me gently on my forehead. Then he hugged me, telling me that he loved me. He sat there looking at me with this humble smile, yet there was a shameful pain within him of what he did simply because he did this in front of his son. It caused me to wonder later in the years, if I had not been with him, would he have fired that worker? Did he fire him to impress me? Is that why he took my hand as he went to find him? Is that why he told me about intolerance after he did that? Or would he have disciplined the man only and gave him another chance had I not been there? I believe that if there was anyone in his life that had his complete trust, it was I. Even though he knew that I lied to him, he understood why. I wondered of how deep down the true Theodore III was buried inside this man who was looking at me, keeping him from sprouting to the surface. The true Theodore III was trying to reach me from the depths of his soul and was asking me to bring him forth by asking me that question. Yes, to tell this one that he was wrong and to allow the other one to surface and to fix things. I smiled at him. He knew that I loved him, I did not have to say it. He knew that I loved him too much to tell him that I thought he was wrong. In this sense I was too nurturing his ego as many others who knew him, thinking that I was protecting his feelings and in a sense, my own as well. I too in my action was continuing his methodology of cold and harsh corporate ruthlessness. He left my room as I never seen him walk before. Even though I told him that he was not wrong, there was no authority in his walk as I had seen of him passively as he walked so proudly, so razor sharp in his tailor-made suits. What he did hurt that man, but it hurt my father more into a state of a gut-wrenching internal sting in which thrust his pride into a serious conflict of interest. His pride that he valued so much was injured, but it was not defeated. And we who knew better in opposition to the wrath of his pride, kept sound counsel from him, encouraging a crude tradition of heartless human beings. We, in our heeding to his ego and power, only buried the true Theodore III more convincingly. During the passing years, I would ponder on that moment. I would reflect upon his image in my mind of him walking away out of my room like rain clouds passing away after a summer rainfall. I thought back of how the light in the hallway from the hall light was shut out from him closing my bedroom door as if it symbolized him walking out of light and into darkness. He needed honesty while I fed him a sweet lie. I then had understood that it was I who was in the darkness, he was the one walking into the light. And in this understanding, I thought that if I had been honest with him at that opportunity, would it have helped make him a better person? Would it have led to getting that man's job back through the shifting of the heart and mind just by my saying a simple yes? I would later in the years to come, realize that it was my father's first confession to me, even before my becoming a priest. Little did he, or even I realize that he also was the inspiration in that sense for I to venture into the direction of the church. Later it was found out that the printing machine was no good and it needed to be replaced. My father spent $100,000 to replace the machine, but the worker was not. It is often asked, are the rich loved for who they are? Or are they loved for what they have? There is no such love for you, for what you have. No such love exists, I was to learn at such a young sensitive age. They love only what you possess, not you who possess it. It is sad to think, the only love that I believe my father ever received was from me. I believe he knew that. He knew that he was lacking love from other corners in which he sensed were only shadows of lurking self-ambitious users who called themselves his friends only at times of when they were able to use him. I don't even think he had it truly with my mother. With him my mother gained security through his success. She did not come from wealthy strings as he. Her upbringing was common, unlike the lies she would tell others within the circle of bugerous people in order to fit into that cesspool of phantoms. Lord only knows how many thought as this. My grandmother, Elaine, on my mother's side was a house servant in their family for almost 30 years, and through her, my mother's people had gotten acquainted with my father's family. She after a while was allowed to bring my mother into the home while she worked. I am sure that my mother was not alone in her deception of the facts of her past in which brought her an unnecessary shame. Elaine was a good woman with good intentions. For in that circle of vultures in terms of my mother, who would care anyway, she was only the wife, thus she was expendable outside the bedroom as most are in this club of synthetic decorated whores. And their husbands did not pull any punches to allow them to know that, considering the many affairs that were filtering about the queue. Some affairs were even secretly allowed for corporate gain. There are no silver spoons born in anyone's mouth that someone else did not put there through blood, sweat and tears. We all, it doesn't matter how far back you may go, come from dirt until someone planted the right seed in rich soil. In a sense she, through her family, envied my father and his family because of their status and wanted to drink from their cup. He was said to be a good catch by my mother's sister, Ruth. Excuse my expression, but it sounds to me to be not far-fetched from prostitution. My father had no problem with her family accepting him, because my mother's people knew the wealth of my father through his family. Even though they were very young at the time they met, it was the older generation that somehow manipulated their union to transpire regardless of the emotional attachments that eventually developed between them, in which had nothing to do with wealth on their behalf. They were just kids being manipulated by corrupted, greed-filled adults as a warped-minded experiment being played upon innocent children who simply played together. It seems as though I am grafted from what is known as crooked strays. He was not a rich man to me. He was my dad. I saw him with honest eyes and kissed him with kisses of honesty. From his own words to my mother, he was created the way he was. His father Theodore II was stern with him, my mother told me. Theodore II was more of a disciplinary than a father that possessed feelings of love and compassion for his only son. My father was man-made, I believe, to the degree that it tarnished the soul out of him when it came to business and left him not only no nonsense, but non-feeling as a human being. He was raised to be a block of ice as a human being and hard as stone as a ruthless businessman. He had powerful enemies from many winds. It told me that messes are made, they do not make themselves. But, it seemed as though he wanted the opposite for me in terms of humanity from a close observation of his elders. He knew he was lost in that area and therefore a prisoner of it. He was taught subliminally for the security of the family's success, that to change, to be any different than ruthless would cause great loss. So the maintenance of what was developed for the family was sustained by an unspoken fear of loss and a greed that was a cold and harsh, a ruthless presence. But it seemed as if I was a fragile piece of glass to him, which he handled with the most certain care, not to break and shatter into many sharp and hurtful pieces to symbolically cut anyone as he has done, or a delicate flower without thorns not to penetrate the mind of anyone. He wanted me to be the balance of himself in giving birth to a generation of moral conduct within this empire. Instead, I became a priest. My mother and I would go with him to charity functions and would watch him get awards for donating so much money to local charities and not charities overseas and so forth. I saw how all of the Bugerius would stand up and boast about how much money they gave, in truly telling each other how rich they were, by being able to give as much as the other or more as the other. To me, even at that young age, I recognized that they were pathetic people who you could not help but to feel sympathy for. Why? Because even though they were rich people and had financial freedom, the same thing that gave them that one form of freedom, had enslaved them in another way that was spiritually self-defeating and regrettable during their last hours of when they would reminisce upon their deathbeds of those whom lives they had crippled and even destroyed. I felt that the moment you mention what you gave nothing in truth, really. In your mentioning one tends to shadow the deed in its essence. It was all designed to make you look like a good person, because the world and even you know that you are not. Or a generous person on the local scene, because you know that you are not what you want everyone to believe you are. You self-deceive yourself like a weak personality or an actor for a movie and create yourself into some synthetic graven image for people to awe at and worship in a begging-like manner. And them looking intensely with a desperate greed, rooted in envy, hoping that at some time you may drop a crumb from your table so that they can gobble it up as a pack of dogs or treacherous wolves. Who would know who you were overseas? No one. And that is why no money was sent overseas. I thought of the man Mr. Aldrich, who he fired. I asked myself, how can he give $5 million to a charity and not give that man another opportunity to earn a living for his family that would only bring him in $21,000 a year? When we as a family would go to church every Sunday, which did not help them, I would never stop looking at the life of a priest. I thought that it was the perfect life to live for if you were as I was. I was a young man who just wanted to treat people with love and respect, unlike my parents. I wanted to be respected because of my attitude towards humanity and not because my parents were rich. I noticed the quiet humility of the cathedral. I saw that it was away from the chaos of life and its activities in which I saw swallowed people up like a python serpent and then manifested through their personality because of becoming a victim to it or a willing vessel. I thought that the life would be different than the outside. Never did I realize at that time that I was but being mesmerized by the propaganda of what it is said to represent. Yet, there was another part of me that wanted the normal life with someone that I loved and who loved me for me and not for what my parents had for me. A part of me would enjoy that and still know how to treat others fairly as they should be treated regardless of their status in life. However, every time I would think of that state of existence in which is very real, I would shudder at the thought because of what I saw in my parents and others that knew them. It was as if they all were drinking from the same glass in which held in it the wine of greed and violence. I was hoping that none of what they were rubbed off on me when the circumstances presented itself, as I would eventually find out in the case of Mary Veilleux. I had the choice to walk into a life that was there for me, in which carried with it wealth and so-called respect of many rich and poor. Also a life opposite of that, which would give me the humility that was missing in the other life. A life that is truly priceless with great meaning. So, it came down to my soul. My soul to me was what was important in truth, regardless of my access to a life that many would steal or even kill for. I was afraid and did not want to become a bugerous person whose only aim in this life and others' lives that surrounded them, is self-interest. Self-interest gained upon the back of the poor and downtrodden. I knew that because of their thinking that was cultivated by their wealth and respect from many generations before them, they would have never accepted Mary because of her humble upbringing. I one day thought to myself of how my parents could not see that they were hated by those who looked up to them. I mean this to say that for others to create you an idol is but giving you death. What this creation does is create in you the sense of gutter importance, in which is an abomination to the soul. It is as a poison for them to give you to drink, and because of your sick need to feel important, you drink from it and therefore poison yourself. I also saw of how my father would bow down to other men who were richer than he was. The rich bowing to those who are richer, is a more pathetic sight to behold. It only makes them all, no matter of their wealth, poor. If I am richer than you, I am greater than you. If I am not, then I am not greater. I saw this and understood that in all of his wealth and power, he was the weakest man that I ever seen in the presence of those who had more than him. He too became a servant. It explained to me, of his blunt attitude and bias towards those who had less than he did. To feel superior to those who had less than he, gave him the power that was taken from him, by him being intimidated of those who were richer than he was. He, as many with this mentality, can only be seen as a fraud in their claim as men of power, substance and prestige, and a hypocrite to those who are closest to them. I feel that it is fair and understanding to assert that, I loved my parents and respected them, but I did not like them as human beings. I knew that I was in some ways no different than they were because of my feeling as though they would not accept Mary if I were to introduce her to them. My not giving that a chance was no different than them not giving her a chance. I was a mess because of them, and I knew it, and had a hatred inside of me because of that. So my decision was to let Mary go. To seek the church and live within its walls and struggle to be a good person and find another form of upbringing than the one that was manufactured and was given to me. It would become the worst decision of my life as well as someone else's. Written by David Anthony Brayboy, being released in 2023.